It's a pleasure to be here with you. Beautiful, beautiful country. I'm very fortunate. And I'm going to start on a somber note. I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection. We've had two events in the past 4 years, which I believe signal the beginning of a very long and dangerous endgame for the great industrial revolution based on fossil fuels. First event, July 2008. You remember that month? Oil hit a record of $147 a barrel on world markets. And when that happened, all the other prices across the entire global supply chain went through the roof. Because everything in this civilization is made out of or moved by fossil fuels. Our pesticides, our fertilizers, our construction materials, our pharmaceutical products, our synthetic fiber, our power, our transport, our heat, our light, it's all made out of fossil fuels. So when oil started to go over $90 a barrel, all the other prices went up in 2007. When oil went to 120 a barrel, we had food riots in 22 countries because 40% of the human race lives on under $2 a day. And when oil prices went up, we saw the price of rice, wheat, barley, and rye double, triple, and treble in price. And the UN, United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, put out a global alert. We have 1 billion people on the verge of starvation. Attention. At $147 a barrel, all the prices in the department store, the grocery store, everything went up, and everyone stopped buying all over the world that month. The purchasing power plummeted, the economic engine shut down, and that was the economic earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later was the aftershock. Our world leaders are still dealing with the aftershock. They're not coming to grips with the earthquake. And until we do, we can't possibly address the challenges facing the young people in this room in the 21st century. We have hit peak globalization based on fossil fuel, industrial technologies and infrastructure, at least in the business community. We now know the outer reach of how far we can globalize the world with fossil fuels and the old technologies. It's between $125 and $150 a barrel. It'll shut down every time. The reason is we've hit two milestones. Peak oil per capita, 1979, peak oil per capita. Global peak oil production, 2006. 1979, and we distributed all the crude oil that existed at that time to everyone alive at that moment in time and shared it. That's the most each person could have. We found more oil since then, but population was a lot quicker. So if we distributed all the crude oil today to 7 billion people, there's just less to go around. Peak oil per capita, 1979. Global peak oil production. This is controversial among the geologists. It's when half the crude oil is used up on the classic Hubert bell curve in geology. When half the oil is used up, it's over, because we can't afford the second half. Geologists have been arguing about peak oil for 25 years, and then the International Energy Agency, which we rely on every government for our forecasting on energy, they dropped a bombshell in 2011. And the IEA said, apparently we peaked in crude oil in 2006 at 70 million barrels a day. We'll probably plateau down 69 million barrels a day over the next 20 years. But listen to this, young people, at a cost of $8 trillion to get the remaining oil out. So when China and India and Southeast Asia made a bid to bring 1/3 of the human race into the second industrial revolution at an 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12% growth rate in the last 15 years. At the last stages of this energy era, too much aggregate demand, not enough energy reserves, oil prices go up, all the other prices go up, shut down. What I'm saying to you is we are now in 4 to 5 year cycles of growth, collapse, growth, collapse. There's no way to get through this end game. Here's the proof. 2009, oil went down to 30 a barrel. No economic activity. As soon as we started to replenish inventory, 2010, oil prices went up. And by 2012, oil hit 124 a barrel again. And when that happened in the first quarter of 2012, Unilever and Colgate-Palmolive, the two big consumer product companies in the world, issued their quarterly statements in the first quarter of this year. They said, profits are down. We have to take the increased oil prices and bet it in increased costs for our consumer products, and people are stopped buying again. We're headed to a second slowdown in the global economy. I predicted this would happen. The first collapse in 2008, and now this. My colleagues said I'm being too pessimistic. This is what's happening. Wake up time. We're in 4-year cycles of growth, slowdown, growth, slowdown. We cannot get through this door. Now there's other fossil fuels. We're not running out. We have tar sands in Canada, heavy oil in Venezuela. We have shale gas, but they're more expensive because they're more scarce, and they lead to the second major event of the last 4 years, climate change. Do we have any engineers? Where are my engineers here? Well, everybody, right? Where are my engineers? Do you study the laws of thermodynamics? Do you study the energy laws? And you know that you cannot escape the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy bill. This is not a metaphor. We have spewed massive amounts of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. This is spent energy. It's entropy. And now the long and short of it is we have too much CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere of this planet because of the first and second industrial revolutions. We just can't get enough of the sun's heat off the planet. The molecules of global gases keep forcing it back down. How bad is it? It's much worse than we're acknowledging. I was here in France in 2007 when the 4th UN Climate Panel Assessment Report came out. 20 years of modeling, 2,500 scientists, all the academies of science in the world, the biggest scientific project in history. And so the report was published in Paris. So President Chirac asked me to come in. We had world leaders there, and my mission is to ask, what do we do now from a business point of view? And the first thing I said at that meeting, that I had gotten it wrong for 30 years, which is a long time to get something wrong. I wrote a book called Entropy in 1980. It was the first book really to deal with climate change, but we only had one study back then. I continued to underestimate the speed of climate change, as did my colleagues, because we couldn't grasp the feedback loops. This is such a complex system. We can't model or even begin to project feedback loops. Then once they happen, we say, how did we miss it? So our scientists say, in 2007, 3 degrees Celsius rise in this century, middle scenario. Now that looks really conservative. But to put this in perspective, 3 degrees in your century, of you and your kids, that takes us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago. Completely different world. And now the chief climatologist for the US government, James Hansen, says we're going up 6 degrees Celsius. And this is a paraphrase from the chief climatologist of NASA, of the US government. The end of human civilization, as we've come to know it. The real terrifying thing about climate change that's never explained by anyone, even Al Gore didn't explain it. It changes the hydrological cycle. That's what's so terrifying. It changes the water cycle. This is the watery planet. Our ecosystems have developed over millions of years dependent on the hydrological water cycles of the Earth. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on the planet from climate change, the atmosphere absorbs 7% more precipitation from the ground because of the heat. It sucks it up to the atmosphere. That changes the entire water cycle in 1 moment in time. Our ecosystems developed over millions of years. They can't adjust to a shift in the hydrological cycle in 1 moment in time. So what we're seeing now is more bitter winter snows, more dramatic spring floods, more prolonged summer droughts, more hurricanes, more tsunamis. Does this sound familiar? This is what's happening all over the world. So our ecosystems are destabilizing because of the water cycle shift. And that means the plant and animal life in these ecosystems are threatened with extinction. Our scientists on all the models are now telling us we are in real-time extinction event right now. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction event on this planet. It's in real time now, not theoretical. We have had 5 mass extinction events of life in the last 450 million years. 5 wipeouts. Every time we had mass extinction, the chemistry of the planet shifted really quickly. Boom. Extinction. And on the average, it took about 10 million years to recover the biodiversity we lost in a moment of time in the geological record. Our scientists project that we are now absolutely in the 6th extinction event. And we could lose upwards of 70% of all the life forms on Earth in your century. As my wife says, we're walking asleep. We're just not getting this. I wonder what it's going to be like for you and your kids. So our world leaders come together in Copenhagen in December 2009, 192 countries. It was a disgrace. It broke down in crisis. It was a geopolitical nightmare. Everyone blaming everyone else. No climate change policy. Maybe the problem is we are the youngest species on the Earth. We're the babies. We're the youngest species. We've only been here about 175,000 years, anatomically modern humans. Maybe we're not grasping the enormity of what we're doing. 99.5% of all the species that have ever been on this planet have come and gone. What kind of hubris do we think that we're going to outlive all the rest of them? This is a century of decision, so let me share an anecdote. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy in the 21st century? That's not an easy question because Germany is the most robust industrial economy per capita in the world. When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, or the European economy, or the global economy in the last stages of a great energy era where the energies are more expensive, the technologies are antiquated, and the infrastructure is on life support? It doesn't make any difference if you live in China, Europe, and the US. This is facing every country in the world. We need a new economic vision for the community of the world. It has to be compelling. We need a new economic game plan to deliver on that vision quickly. The game plan has to move as fast in the emerging nations as in the industrialized countries. We have to be off carbon in 30 years. And it's going to depend on the young people in these rooms that are preparing yourself in the technologies of the 21st century to get this job done. So let me step back and ask the question. How did the great economic revolutions in history occur? We know how they occur. We can get a roadmap here of how to direct this great institution of higher learning and this region to open the door to the next period of history. The great economic revolutions in history, they occur when two phenomena merge. Energy revolutions, and new energy revolutions make possible more complex civilizations. But new energy revolutions, because they're complex, require new communication revolutions to manage it. All throughout history, when communication revolutions merge and converge and organize and coordinate energy revolutions, when they come together, it changes the economic paradigm. It changes consciousness. It changes history. Let me give you an example. 19th century, we went from manual print presses to steam-powered printing. It was a great communication revolution. Linotype, rotary presses. We could now mass produce massive volumes of print material really cheaply, low transaction cost, just like the internet today. Then the French introduced a great invention to the world called the public school system, French idea. We created a print literate workforce in Europe and America with the communication skills, print and literacy, to manage a very complex coal-powered, steam-driven rail industrial revolution. First industrial revolution, communication energy. We could never have organized that first industrial revolution with a completely illiterate workforce. 20th century, another convergence of communication and energy, a second industrial revolution. Centralized electricity, especially the telephone. We think the internet's a big deal, and let me tell you, the telephone is a big deal. So with the telephone, and then later radio and television, that communication revolution of centralized electricity allowed us to merge that communication with a new energy regime, oil, the automobile, a mass assembly culture, a consumer society. That second industrial revolution is dying. You can smell it. Everywhere I travel, I smell its death. The energies are more expensive. Does anyone think fossil fuels and uranium are going to get cheaper? Of course not. The technologies, the internal combustion engine, centralized electrification, they're a disgrace. They're moribund. They're 20th century technologies. There's no S-curve left. The whole infrastructure of this civilization is still made out of carbon. It's on life support. We are, however, right now, this morning, on the cusp of a new convergence of communication and energy, a third industrial revolution, especially in Germany. But it's now starting to move across Europe, in France, in Italy, in Denmark, just beginning in the last 24 months. We had a very powerful communication revolution in the last 25 years. Personal computer and the internet. What's so interesting about this communication revolution is the way it's organized. Now, I'm a war baby. I'm by far the oldest person in this room. I grew up on centralized communication, top-down, one-to-many, radio, television, newspapers. What's interesting about the internet revolution is it's not centralized top-down and one-to-many. It's organized to be distributed, collaborative, and it scales to lateral power. So today, and this always amazes me, today, I've got mine, 1/3 of the human race can take a little thing, a little tool in their hand and send their own video, audio, and text with almost zero marginal cost, because the infrastructure is in, and you can send it distributed, collaborative, to 2 billion people, 2.3 billion people, with more lateral power, peer-to-peer power, than all the centralized TV networks in the world. And let me say, the internet's only 20 years old, really 1992, when it came into mass use. Tell me when we can't get the job done if we have the narrative. But this internet revolution is only half the story. Now the internet, which is distributed, collaborative, and lateral power, is just now beginning to merge in Germany and Denmark, starting here, places, France, with a new energy regime, distributed energies, which have to be organized collaboratively and scale laterally. Perfect fit, communication and energy. What are distributed energies? Well, let me compare them to elite energies: coal, oil, gas, shale, gas, tar sands. They are elite because when you go home today, you're not going to find them in your backyards. They're only found in a few places. They require huge military investments to secure them, huge geopolitical investments to manage them, especially you understand this in Europe. We fought 2 world wars, one on coal, one on oil. And they require massive capital to organize them from the wellhead to the end user. Be clear, the fossil fuel and nuclear energies are the most elite, centralized, costly processing of energy in all of human history. And they scale top down. And they're sunset. What are distributed energies? Now those are energies, when you go home today, you have every energy you need in your backyard, more than you'll ever need. The sun shines all over the world every day. 45 minutes of sunlight can power the whole global economy for a year, no problem. The wind blows all over the earth every day as a source of energy. Underneath this planet, the ocean floor, underneath the ground right here, in this region, everywhere, is a hot geothermal core of energy. You can convert it overnight, more energy than you'll ever need. In the rural areas, we have agricultural and forestry waste, biomass. They can be converted quickly to energy. In the ocean areas, right here, you have the ocean tides and waves. This is surf country here. I know you got a lot of ocean tides and waves with the surf. They're coming in every day, and that's a source of energy. And wherever we have garbage, and we have a lot of garbage, we can convert it anaerobically back to energy. These are distributed energies. They're found in every square inch of this planet in some frequency or proportion. The European Union has made a formal commitment to bring this internet technology, communication technology together to coordinate this distributed energy and create a third industrial revolution. I was privileged to work with the European Union and develop this plan. We've done it over 10 years, almost 11. And I should say Germany's really leading the charge, but other countries are moving quick. I'm in touch now with 5 regions in France about master plans for third industrial revolution, and we just announced this week, you may have seen in Le Monde, we're going to do a master plan for Nord-du-Calais. France is going to move really quickly. Pillar 1. The European Union is committed to 20% renewable energy by 2020. Every region, including this one, has to make that goal. It's a mandate, not a suggestion. That means a third of the electricity in this region has to be green by 2020. Pillar 2. How do we collect energy that's everywhere, distributed? Now, our first thought was, we're going to go to Italy, Spain, and Greece. They got a lot of sun. And we're going to put in some big solar parks, a high voltage electricity line, and we're going to ship it. And the Irish have all that offshore wind. We're going to put in huge wind parks off Ireland and ship it. And the Norwegians have hydro, concentrate it, ship it. Let me say, none of us oppose these more concentrated uses of what are essentially distributed energies. They're easy, they're quick, they're low-lying fruits, as they say, but they're not sufficient. The idea that we can manage a continental or global economy with these concentrated places where we collect distributed energies, it's nonsense. You can't do it. They're just a little bit of the part of the mix. If distributed energies are found everywhere, why would we only concentrate them in a few points? Then we realized we were using 20th century thinking, top-down, centralized, based on fossil fuels. This got us to pillar 2. If renewable energies are everywhere, how do we collect them? Everywhere we have buildings, infrastructure. We have 191 million buildings in the EU, excuse me. We have 191 million buildings here in the EU. Homes, offices, factories, and barns. The goal, convert every single existing building in Europe to your own personal green micropower plant. So you collect solar off the roof, wind off the wall of your factory, geothermal heat underneath your office building, Garbage converted to energy, take the ocean tides in ways that works. The new buildings are actually positive power, and it's a French company that created the key invention of the third industrial revolution, your own positive power plant, and the company is Bouygues out of Paris, the great French construction company. I didn't think they'd do it. I sat down with Olivier Bouygues 4 years ago. He showed me the blueprints. He did. Last year, the French company Bouygues built the first positive power building in the world in the suburbs of Paris near the OECD headquarters. It's drop-dead gorgeous architecturally. It sucks up so much sun, it provides all of its own needs and has a lot more power to send back to the grid. The second pillar jumpstarts the economy. Everyone says, how do we put people back to work? We got to convert every single building to a power plant over 40 years in Europe and the world. That's millions of jobs, thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises to contract with, and big companies. That'll keep us busy for 40 years. And the minute you start this, the jobs day one, businesses day one, return on investment, it's all infrastructure. Let me use the analogy here of why the positive power building is so important. Here's the analogy. 1970, we had a few centralized mainframe computers, and companies were sharing information top down. Then this kid, Steve Jobs, comes along. This kid invents the personal computer. Now, a third of the human race, with no transaction cost, zero marginal cost, are sending information to each other. Lateral power. The positive power building is analogous to your own personal computer. Now you can generate your own energy. So today we have a handful of big energy and utility companies, you know their names, all over the world. They generate power, we buy it. But already in Europe, there are several million buildings that are partial power with a little photovoltaic plant, a geothermal heat pump. Germany has converted 1 million buildings to produce some of their own green power since the chancellor's come in, and created 370,000 net jobs. And they're at 20% green electricity already and headed to 35%. This is not academic. In 10 years from now, tens of millions of buildings on this planet, existing buildings, will be converted to at least small partial power plants. In 20 years from now, several 100 million buildings on this planet, existing buildings, not just new ones, will be converted to power plants. The new buildings will be legislated. They have to be positive power. It's following a similar exponential cost curve as the shift from mainframe computers to desktops and cell phones. It's not Moore's law, but it's exponential. You know exponential growth, you double that penny, it doesn't look like much for the first 15 days, and straight up. That's what's happened. What happened with the shift from mainframe computers to desktop is the exponential scaling in. The technology became cheaper and cheaper. Now they give you the cell phone free and you buy the service. We're going to see the same thing happening now as buildings harvest their own energy. Solar, wind are now reaching parity. The next is geothermal, biomass, hydro. These technologies are going to get so cheap in the next 25 years because of what these university students are doing in the technology universities like here. They're going to be so cheap. The solar, the wind, the geothermal, the biomass, they're going to be as cheap as desktops, computers, and cell phones in 20 years. Then the energy's free. Coal, oil, gas is never free. The sun is free over your building. The wind on the side of your office, it's free. The heat underneath the ground of your building, that's free. Your garbage converted energy, free. The ocean tides out here, they're free. So just as information has become nearly free once we put in the infrastructure, that was costly. As we put in the infrastructure for these 5-pillar industrial revolution, the energy's become free, nearly free. That's pillar 2. Pillar 3 is the challenge. Storage. The sun isn't always shining. Sometimes the wind blows at night. We want the electricity during the day. Water tables can be down for hydropower because of climate drought. These are intermittent energies. We have to store it. Pillar 3. The EU is in favor of all storage technologies, flywheels, batteries, capacitors, water pumping. We like them all. But at the center of storage, we're focusing on hydrogen. We want all of it. But hydrogen is the basic element of the universe. It's what we're made of. It stores other energies, and it's modular. You can use it in a small office or in a big utility power system. So the EU has committed 8 billion euros to a public-private deployment of hydrogen, and here's how it works. Let's say your house, you have a little solar collector on the house panel, on the roof, solar panel. You're generating a little electricity. If you have some surplus electricity you're not using, put that electricity in water. Remember high school chemistry? Put the electricity in water. The hydrogen comes out of the H2O into a tank. When the sun isn't shining on your solar panel, convert that hydrogen with a fuel cell back to electricity. Storage. Engineers, this is a tiny, tiny thermodynamic loss compared to bringing fossil fuels and nuclear at every stage of conversion and entropic loss all the way to the end user. Pillar 3. Pillar 4, this is the cool pillar, all the young people like it. This is where the internet technology merges with the new energies to create the nervous system for the new paradigm. We are using off-the-shelf internet technology and IT to convert the entire power and electricity grid of Europe to an energy internet, a distributed smart grid. If you hear the word smart grid and no distributed in front of it, that means the power companies just want to put an advanced meter in your home, get a lot of information at central headquarters to control it top down. This is an energy internet, distributed, meaning when millions and millions and millions of buildings are collecting just a tiny bit of their own green energy, maybe 10%. If they don't need a few of that 10% energy, their software can direct them to sell that green electricity across an energy internet from the Irish Sea all the way to Russia on an energy internet. Just like we create our own information, store it in digital, share it online. Deutsche Telekom is now testing the distributed grid in 6 regions of Germany. And E.ON in Germany on Pillar 3 is working with Hydrogenics and my group to set up hydrogen storage across the utility complex. Pillar 5. Transport. Green transport is here. Electric vehicles are out. Fuel cell cars, buses, and trucks are out in mass production. 6 major auto companies, all of them. This is a done deal, 2015. You'll be able to plug in your vehicles, cars, buses, and trucks, wherever there's infrastructure, get green electricity. Then wherever you travel, every single street will have a little meter and plug. You plug back in, get green electricity, or sell your hydrogen in terms of electricity or your electricity back to the grid. That's the 5 pillars that together connect and make a super mega technology platform, what we call a general purpose technology. A mega technology platform, a general purpose technology, and it's a living organism. It's an infrastructure that changes the entire business model of the world. This is power to the people. I mean this, literally and figuratively. So you imagine several billion people sharing information. Your generation in these universities, you're going to now take that IT and internet technology and you're going to put it to renewable energies so that billions of people are going to harvest their own energy. This is power to the people. This will change consciousness, this will change politics, this will change society. Let me caution you, do not make the mistake we made in the United States, President Obama and our universities. President Obama wanted a green economy. He still does. He talks about it all the time. He spent billions and billions of dollars of US stimulus money to get to us a green economy. He wasted it because he would give money to a battery factory in one state, a solar factory in another state, isolated pilot projects. He didn't connect them. He didn't realize that the great economic paradigm shifts require communication and energy revolutions to merge and then infrastructure to come down at the same time. You can't isolate these in little pilot projects. You've got to connect them. The second industrial revolution, it wasn't enough to have the automobile. Then you have to have the highways at the same time, and the gas pipelines, and the centralized electricity. You needed it all to make it work. This third industrial revolution, infrastructure, the connections between these 5 pillars give you a completely new general purpose technology platform for a new business model embedded in it. Let me give you an example. Many of you young people are very excited about 3D printing, correct? 3D printing? That's the manufacturing model for a third industrial revolution, because the revolutionary infrastructure is distributed, collaborative, and lateral. 3D printing is distributed, collaborative, and lateral. You can't graft it onto a second industrial revolution that's centralized. So, as we move this 5-pillar nodal infrastructure here into this region, starting here in this technology park, it allows us to then nestle 3D printing into that infrastructure. So today, we have a couple of hundred companies doing 3D printing. It's moving faster than the internet did in 1990. It's called the Internet of Things. And so you can take a 3D printer. Do you have any 3D printers here? You're working on them right here? Cool, right? I mean, it's magic. It's very a lot of fun. I wish I were your age. So you can take a 3D printer, open source coding, no proprietary rights. The young people want it all open source. Share the software. Your printer software can direct molten plastic or molten metal to layer by layer add up and build a physical 3-dimensional product with moving parts that pops out of the printer. Unbelievable. What's interesting about this is it changes the manufacturing model. I teach at the Wharton School. It's the oldest business school in the world, and I teach the business leaders, executive ed. I taught them subtractive manufacturing based on, if you have elite centralized energies and communication, you have to scale your factory production top down because it's expensive, all right? So in subtractive manufacturing, big centralized factories, because they have to rely on expensive energy and communications, and you take a big hunk of material from nature, you pare it down, cut it down, winnow it down, splice it down, then you create your final product, right? You waste a lot. It's like French cooking, if I may say. It is so inefficient, but the final product is absolutely delicious. I mean, you can't beat it, but it's pretty inefficient cooking. You know this. So, with additive manufacturing, a small and medium-sized factory here in this region, a little factory, a little SME, a little producer co-op, when they make their product, they're building it up. It's additive manufacturing, not subtractive. Layer by layer, this whole product is being created as one product, and it uses 1/10 of the materials. You can outcompete the big boys, centralized factories, whether it's in China or America or Europe. Then, if your little factory here in this region, your SME, your producer co-op, is powering their factory with their own green electricity, they're off the oil spigot, world prices, nuclear power. What about marketing? In the second industrial revolution, you had to pay a lot of money for TV, advertising, magazine, radio, centralized. Today, an SME in this region can take the product out of their printer, power it in their own factory, and they can go up on marketing sites on the internet with almost zero marginal cost for marketing. How many of you people have heard of Etsy? E-T-S-Y. It's an internet website, Etsy. Not one person has heard of Etsy, E-T-S-Y. Where are they? Who's heard of it? Okay, it's a very cool site. This young college student dropped out of New York University 7 years ago. His name's Rob Caleb. He wanted to create craft furniture in his apartment. His parents must have been so pissed off. So he quit school. He creates all this craft furniture in his apartment in Brooklyn. But he forgot to market it. So he's overwhelmed with furniture in his apartment. So he comes together with 2 other young people. They create a site called Etsy. Today, 7 years later, 900,000 craft producers all over the world, small craft producers, advertise on the site free. 49 million consumers all over the world go on the site. They look for the craft producer to make the sale they want. And Etsy only gets a tiny, tiny commission on each sale. Those tiny commissions add up to $600 million last year in revenue. So this young guy, John Kalin, called me last year. And he said, Mr. Rifkin, now that I've done this, what do I do? I said, retire. Live the good life. You've done your job. All right? He's actually moving on to other things. So now, if you're in this region, you're an SME, producer co-op, you have open source software, you're producing your own product, 1/10 of the materials, locally powered with your own green electricity, marketing it on websites that are almost free all over the world. Then, your logistics for transporting your goods is your electric vehicles, which you're powering locally with your energy co-ops. This is distributed capitalism. It's actually beyond capitalism and it's beyond socialism. It borrows from both because it requires that every one of you be your own entrepreneur, but it requires success. Success is based on deep, deep social collaboration. It's actually beyond socialism and capitalism. It's collaboratism. It's a collaborative entrepreneurialism. It requires everybody working together and sharing, open source. The third industrial revolution, it favors small and medium-sized enterprises. Large companies won't all disappear. The ones that stay, they're already thinking about how to transition from being primary producers to being aggregators and networks. And they'll have to work more on an even playing field because the SMEs and producer co-ops can organize cooperatively with far more lateral power. Big companies are going to be not the masters, but partners that exist. The third industrial revolution, the name of the game as to whether any region in this world survives economically, or any country, or any industry, or any company. Whether anyone survives or fails from a business point of view in the next 25 years, and I want you to hear this, will not depend on your labor cost. Labor is becoming a smaller component in the production process because of technology displacement. Whether you succeed or fail, from an economic perspective in any company, is going to depend on your energy cost. During this volatile transition, where the old energies are going up in price, the new energies have to scale in, and the technology. So whether you succeed or fail in the next 25 years during this transition, from a second to a third industrial revolution, will depend more on the energy cost, not the labor cost, embedded in your products, because the products are made out of energy, and your supply chain, everything. Now I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret that the economists don't want you to know about if you're engineers. You ready for this? This is really pretty interesting. They hate me for doing this, but this is really interesting. When Robert Solow won the Nobel Prize on economic growth theory, he let the cat out of the bag. Robert Solow said, we used to believe that the key to productivity is capital per worker. You put a lot of capital per worker, decreases productivity. And the reason we believe that is we love capitalism, so we like to believe capital per worker, more productivity. But Robert Solow said, when we look at the Industrial Revolution, capital per worker only accounts for about 14% of the productivity gains. So Robert Solow asked, where did the other 84% of productivity come from? He said, we don't know. Can you imagine that? The economists didn't know. Every engineer here knows, every chemist knows, every biologist knows, every architect knows, every urban planner knows. The economists don't know. Why? Because the economists never study the laws of thermodynamics, the energy laws, which are the whole basis of economic activity. That's why they didn't get it. We now know, 30 years after Solow, when you track the Industrial Revolution, the other 84% of productivity, thermodynamic efficiencies. But every engineer knows it. But here's why the economists didn't know this. When we created classical economic theory, Adam Smith, Baptiste say, The rage at that moment was Newton's physics. Everyone wanted to be scientific like Newton. So in the late 1700s, Adam Smith and the others, they used Newton's metaphors. For example, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Ah, supply, demand, supply, demand. They're all Newtonian metaphors. The laws of thermodynamics, which govern economic activity, were discovered by engineers and chemists in the late 19th century. And we know that all economic activity is taking low entropy inputs. Energy is both in a material solid form, our materials, our metals, our ores, all of that's energy. We transform these materials and these energies at every stage to create products and goods and utilities with an entropic loss with every conversion, thermodynamic loss, and eventually they go back to nature, high entropy, and recycle. That's the whole basis of economic activity, and everyone that studied thermodynamics would understand it. So, 84% of productivity gains is thermodynamic efficiencies. To the extent that any company, any industry, or any region can put in a third industrial revolution infrastructure and embed the new business models in that infrastructure, you can reduce your energy cost, increase your thermodynamic efficiencies, and dramatically increase productivity, but in a sustainable way, because it's not carbon and it's based on the energy flows of the earth. And we're rewarded in terms of productivity by using less energy, not more. The whole point is efficiency isn't just about climate change and sustainability, it's the way you create productivity. So to the extent that we can dramatically increase productivity, it's by reducing energy use. The first and second industrial revolution phased in top down and gave rise to national markets and national governments to regulate centralized energy and communication. Let me say also, the young people in the Occupy movement, they got it right. The 1%, the 99%. But it's not just about deregulation. That was the final twist of the screw, from Reagan and Thatcher to Clinton and Bush. It's a longer process. If you know at the beginning of a civilization the communication energy matrix, how it's organized, you pretty well know how the production and distribution is going to be organized, absolutely. So today, at the end of the second industrial revolution, centralized energy, centralized communications, we had to vertically scale centralized factories and logistics and distribution. 3 out of the 5 largest companies in the world today in the global stock exchange are energy companies. And that doesn't account for government-run companies. Below them, a handful of financial institutions that finance the capital for these centralized energy and communication. And below them, 500 global companies that are completely embedded in this second industrial revolution. And those 500 companies account for 1/3 of the entire GDP of the world. Now, let me say that all of us in this room are disproportionately better off at the end of the second industrial revolution than our ancestors were at the beginning of the first, correct? We agree? But those who are on top of the pyramid are even much better off. And it's becoming more destabilized between the 1% and the 99% as we mature this revolution. The third industrial revolution is power to the people. There's a lot of players that don't want to see this happen. I'm not worried about it. This is a better idea. And there's no plan B. Go back to the 20th century. More inequality, less opportunity, and climate change imperiling our species. The third industrial revolution, this is important for the region. And that's why I'm glad you invited me here. The third industrial revolution scales in laterally. It favors not national markets and national governments. It favors continental markets and continental political institutions that are lateral to regulate codes and standards. It comes in like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was pretty improbable. Wi-Fi is kind of a really weird idea. Somebody discovered, we don't know who the first person was, they can take their garbage frequencies that opens their garage, because they were free. Then they asked the next door neighbor, I don't know who it was, let's connect my garage to your garage. That's how this started. We don't know who the first person was. Within 10 years, entire continents are now Wi-Fi. People are real social. You know, everyone says we're a predatory species, we're a competitive species. No, we are the most social species. That's our primary drive. Big neocortex, we move Wi-Fi across the planet because we want to communicate with each other. Third industrial revolution comes in just like Wi-Fi, nodally. If you create a 5-pillar node in this entire region, as soon as you lay up the node, you got jobs, businesses, and return on investment on infrastructure day one. And then you constantly have to look for another node. Because if you have a good day here and the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, you want to share your surplus with some other part of Europe where they don't have it going. If it's a nighttime zone way over in Eastern Europe, they want to share your wind with you in the daytime. Where there's agricultural waste during harvest time in one part of Europe, they want to take that biomass and sell it to an urban area in another zone. So the third industrial revolution requires thousands and thousands of nodes, finding other nodes, and sharing energy all across continents, because continents vary on climate, times of season, days and nights, right? So we're headed toward continentalization. The way we globalize in the third industrial revolution is flat, bottom, like Wi-Fi. The third industrial revolution doesn't give a damn about borders. There's no borders between Basque Country here and Basque Country, Spain, or anywhere else. It likes to go like Wi-Fi across the entire continent, and you connect. Now, Europe is ideally positioned for this to be the leader here. I hope we make it. We may not. Europe has 500 million consumers, and an additional 500 million consumers in the partnership regions in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Gulf. That's 1 billion people. There's nothing like that market in the world. We need to feed the golden goose. Everyone's saying, what's the next stage of Europe? Is it going to implode? We know austerity is not enough. I'm for austerity, but do not undermine the European dream, which is quality of life. Do not compromise the social market model, which is the signature of Europe. And do not tamper with the sustainable economic development. Within that framework, we can make some cuts. That's not enough. And we can do the Schroeder reforms, labor reforms, market reforms, fiscal reforms. Fine, I'm for that. That's not enough. If we're in a dying second industrial revolution, those reforms won't get us to a new economy. So we need these reforms, but we need to move toward a new economy, and Europe has what it needs, which is a 1 billion person market. Now, all of you university students here at this tech campus, you need to help create this 5-pillar infrastructure so we can nodally connect Europe in one paradigm. Thousands of nodes, one seamless infrastructure for broadband communication, managing distributed energy on an energy internet with a seamless plug-in transport system across Europe and the partnership regions, so that in 20 years from now, 1 billion people are off carbon, seamless integrated market, and a sustainable future. And we require this to mature the Union, because the EU, as a lateral political network, will create the codes, the regulations, the standards, the interoperability, but it will be the regions who will create the nodes and the business opportunities and connect up the continent, like Wi-Fi. Let me say one last thing here. This is not rocket science. This is just a pragmatic plan. If there's a plan B, I ask people, step up and tell me what it is. Go back to the 20th century. Go back to fossil fuels and nuclear power. Go back to centralized communication. This generation in the room, you're not going back there. You and your kids and your grandchildren, 3 generations on distributed collaborative lateral power. You think you're going to be surrounded by nuclear power plants and coal-fired power plants in the 21st century? Got to move forward. The older generation has to have the wisdom to say, let the younger generation move forward and get this done. This is a pragmatic plan. My wife was pretty brutal about this about a year ago. She said to me, it took you people 20 years to think of these 5 pillars? She said, that's kind of embarrassing. She said, obviously we have to get off carbon. We're killing the planet. That means renewable energies, because we have enough energies for the whole planet forever. Pillar 1. She said, pillar 2, they're everywhere, so you have to collect them everywhere. So obviously, you would collect them in and around your infrastructure and buildings. Pillar 3, we know they're intermittent, so you have to store them. Add hydrogen and other storage. Makes sense. Then she said, pillar 4, yeah, you can't go it alone. This isn't decentralized, it's distributed. A little house alone can't create enough power. It's only when we share it across continents and energy in that you run economy. And then she said, if you have that in place, of course, you then plug it into your transport, pillar 5. You see, she actually said to me, it took you 20 years, all of you, to figure this out. This is a paradigm shift. When it becomes obvious, it's obvious. And for everyone under the age of 40, I hear this. For everyone over 60, they go, because here's the paradigm shift. Here's the paradigm shift. For my generation, lateral power is an oxymoron. You know what an oxymoron is? Lateral power is an oxymoron. Because from the great hydraulic civilizations in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley of India and China, through the Second Industrial Revolution, with the exception of late medieval Europe, with their wind and water power, we think power is pyramidal, top down. Power is always pyramidal, top down. But for everyone in this room that grew up on the internet, for you, power is peer-to-peer. It's lateral. It's collaborative. This is a great consciousness shift in history. However, we're not going to get there with just technology alone. Unless we shift consciousness quickly and dramatically, the technology won't get us there quickly enough. We have to shift from geopolitics to biosphere consciousness in one generation. We have to extend the basic empathic drive. We are soft-wired for empathic distress. We now know that in our neural circuitry. That's our basic drive. We're the most social creature. We have to extend that empathic drive. We've done it through history. Forager hunter societies, the empathic drive went to blood ties. When we went to the great hydraulic civilizations and writing, we went to theological, from mythological to theological consciousness, and extended empathy to people of like-minded religious affiliation. We consider them extended family. Then when we went in the 19th century to the first industrial revolution, we extended our empathic drive from theological to ideological consciousness. Now everyone in France says I'm French, and I believe everyone else, I've kissed them, they're my brother and sister, they're an extended family, but I won't kiss the Germans. All right? And then in the 20th century, second industrial revolution, we extended empathy with psychological consciousness, soulmates, people of like-minded associational ties. So at every step of history, communication energy revolutions allow us to annihilate time and space, but then we have to organize ourselves in larger families, and that empathic drive allows us to experience the other as ourself in bigger units. Blood ties, religious ties, ideological ties. This generation in this room, you're moving that empathic sensibility to the biosphere. You're Skyping in global classrooms. You're on Facebook with 1 billion people. And you're beginning to see that the next stage is to understand that our indivisible community is the biosphere. That's not a metaphor. It's a scientific term. The biosphere is the sheath from the stratosphere to the oceans, where all the geochemical living processes interact to maintain the mystery of life. The biosphere is our individual community. We don't give up our national ties, our cultural ties, our religious ties, or our blood ties, but like the Russian dolls, they're embedded in a bigger unit, the biosphere. I'm guardedly hopeful. I don't know if we can make this. This is a pretty big challenge, and our scientists are telling us we're running against the clock. And the problem is climate change is here. We don't know how far it's progressed. There is no way to adjust afterwards to something this catastrophic. We have to believe we have enough time. We have to believe we have enough time. We've got to move aggressively. But it's going to require this consciousness shift, and here's why I'm guardedly hopeful. There are 12-year-old kids here in this region and all over the world. They are coming home from school all over the world, and this is done in 5 years. They're saying to Daddy, why are you using so much water while you're shaving? They're saying to Mom and Dad, why is the little red light on the TV on? No one's watching this television. They're saying, why do we have 2 cars? Why don't we do car sharing? This is the one I particularly like. A lot of young people are coming home and said, where does this piece of beef come from on my table? Because here's the big secret. You know, the number one cause of climate change is buildings. The number two is beef production and consumption and animal husbandry, and no one ever wants to talk about it. Number three is transport. We got 12-year-old kids coming home saying, where did this hamburger come from? Or this steak, we're in France. Did this come from a rainforest? Did they have to destroy the trees in the rainforest for 4 little inches of topsoil for 4 years of grazing so the cow could be raised and I could have my hamburger? And when they destroyed those trees, what happened to all the plant and animal life that lived in the tree canopy? Did they go extinct? And if there's no more trees there because they have to graze the cow for my hamburger, there's no sink to absorb industrial CO2 because the trees are gone. That means the temperature of the earth is going up, and some farmer, she or he, cannot feed their kids because of droughts and floods and droughts, because of the hamburger on my plate. We've got kids all over the world coming home and saying this. This is biosphere consciousness, not geopolitical consciousness. What we're beginning to realize is that every single thing we do, every moment of the day and night, has an ecological footprint that affects the well-being of some other family, some other creature, some other ecosystem. Every species alive, every plant, every animal has an ecological footprint. So we're beginning to realize we're embedded in a common biosphere, and then we have to think distributed, collaborative, lateral. We have to think systemically. We have to realize the human family is our family, and our fellow creatures are our evolutionary family, and we're in this together. What's interesting about this university here is you are doing interdisciplinary thinking. You're trying to create systemic approaches to knowledge. You're trying to cross the various academic disciplines and see how to connect the dots. What we need from you is this. You motivate this region, and let this region motivate France. We've got to move into a third industrial revolution now. There's no mystery that Germany is going to do this and no one else. And what I would say to you is, here's my bet. France is going to join Germany in the next 24 months. I met with Mr. Hollande during the elections. He said, we're going to give you a third industrial revolution. And so did Mr. Montagu. But it's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the regions, moving this nodally across France. We're now in discussions with 5 regions of France to start master plans. Let us start here in this region. You have a great university complex. You have a science center here. You have companies here. Start this revolution. Build this third industrial revolution infrastructure. Transform the consciousness of this region. Let Europe move to the next stage of its integration, which is a continental market and a seamless post-carbon infrastructure. And the real legacy you will leave as young people, when you're my age, you want to be able to look back over the next 40 or 50 years and say, we started something that had a profound impact on the world. We connected up with our other universities, which you have in your partnership, and we've created a sustainable world. Hopefully we get the temperature down on the planet. We save our fellow species. We create a just and humane society, and we provide qualitative life for the next generation of young people. This will not be easy, but nothing in life is. But this will be rewarding. And life is short. Let me tell you, 50 years goes like this. Be on page, be on mission, take the knowledge you're getting here, join in collaborative networks with young people around the world, and be determined to make this happen. The alternative is not worth considering. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for this challenge, Mr. Rifkin. So you can ask a question. Vous pouvez poser des questions en français, in English also, and Basque maybe. Yes, it's okay.
So hold on, Philip, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, it's your turn. I can. Sound good.
Thanks, Mr. Rifkin. I wonder what could be the impact of the third industrial revolution on the future of aeronautic industry?
On what industry?
Aeronautic industry, airplanes.
Oh, airplane, okay. I had an interesting discussion. Airbus called me, the senior strategic management team, several months ago. We talked about this. I know that you do aeronautics here. There's some industrial production here. The airline industry, the cost of fuel is going through the roof. The reason we're headed to continentalization, I'll give you a little story that's in the book. If you read the Third Industrial Revolution, there's a chapter where International Post is in my group. That's all the CEOs of the logistics company. And we sat in a little hotel outside of Paris in May 2008, I think it was, and you could see on the expressions of the CEOs something was happening. They said, nothing's moving in the ports. Nothing's moving in the warehouses. Logistics, nothing's moving. It was like fear. 2 months later, price of oil, global economy collapsed. And that's now we realize that the cost of shipping across the world, especially air freight, but even ocean, it's very expensive. And I know you have navigation systems technology here, and so we've got to find a way to replace the existing fuels for airplanes with biofuels. And they are experimenting, and they do have airplanes that do run on biofuels now. We've got to make it cost beneficial, and we have to use the right fuels. Corn, hear me, is a loser. We all knew it at the beginning. The thermodynamic inputs of corn wash out any energy output you get. It's purely a political device to get the votes of corn farmers. Sugar beets, sugar cane, that's a good fuel because you can use the waste product. So we have to develop a new generation of biofuels that do not use the land at the expense of food, but provide the biofuels for our planet. But also, it's not just the actual fuel, it's the whole logistics of transport. Remember I said it's energy cost, not labor cost. So if you audit the logistics of air transport at every step of the chain, the materials, not just the energy, the materials in the plane, the supply chain, how the transport and logistics of air travel, and you start to manage the energy flows, that's really important. Now, there are companies now emerging in France and Europe called ESCOs, energy savings companies. They can be a network of transport, logistics, IT, energy. And what these ESCOs are doing, just started, is they're going to clients like let's say an airplane producer, and they're saying, we will help you manage your energy flows. We'll bring together IT, internet technology, logistics, transport, construction expertise, and we will manage your energy flows with you and help you reduce your energy costs across the supply chains for your aeronautics. And then your productivity increase will be shared with us, shared savings. If we can't manage those energy flows with you, we'll take the loss. But if your productivity goes up, you share your savings with us. It's called shared savings agreement. There are many other business models in the book, the Third Industrial Revolution, that go into this in more detail. But in other words, there's lots of potential here to create, in this technology part, ESCOs that could then work on the whole audit chain. Not just the energy and the fuel, the materials, the logistics, the transport, all of that. We haven't even begun to increase the productivity. These audits are very naive at this point. Someone else?
Yes, I have a question. You talked about the French education system created by Jules Ferry at the end of the 19th century.
What I like about that system is a great line. I used it in one of my books 30 years ago. Was it Cornell, one of your great leaders, I think it was a philosopher, said, we can tell you what every single student is doing at any moment of the time during the entire day. Whether they're conjugating verbs, whether they're learning math, everything precise, factory system coordinated. We used your model.
Well, I was educated within the system, but how do you see the evolution of the education system within this third industrial revolution?
The biggest chapter in the Third Industrial Revolution book, which is not really being talked about much, but the biggest chapter is the one called Remaking the Classroom. The French school system model that we all used is a factory model. And that is, the school system is a microcosm of the centralized scaling of a fossil fuel and centralized communication infrastructure. So you have the teacher at the front, and the teacher gives out assignments, just like Frederick Taylor did in scientific management, and the students are the little production units, and they're supposed to memorize and regurgitate back the assignment, just like you do on the factory floor with Taylor's Principles of Scientific Management. In the factory model, there's one-way communication, top-down, teacher to student. If the students laterally start sharing information laterally, we call it cheating. You get that? We call it cheating. So the idea is that the teacher is the authority figure. Each student is an autonomous agent. That's kind of the Anglo-American tradition, but the French use it. Each student is an autonomous agent. Knowledge is power. Each individual possesses knowledge at the expense of the other in a competitive market economy. And the goal is to turn out productive citizens. Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's off to work we go. So we need to move now. We have a generation in this room on the internet that's completely collaborative. When I give an assignment in my office, it's all young people. I maybe give an assignment to one person, and 10 minutes later, I see 3 people doing it together at the computer. It's just the way it is. So what we need to do now is move toward a distributed collaborative classroom. The teacher still has to be there, has to impart knowledge, has to create some structure and order. This isn't chaos. Then the teacher has to expect that the students will break down in modular units, in teams, begin to be responsible for critical thinking, and then report back to the larger group and begin to create a distributed approach to knowledge. We have to encourage global Skyping in classrooms so we share knowledge laterally across the world. Are you Skyping here with other university classrooms? You probably are. One thing the US does that you don't do is service learning. That's a revolution in the last 15 years in the US. We break open the classroom. So it isn't just break open the classroom to cyberspace. We break open the classroom to the physical community surrounding the school. So in American schools, do we have any American students here? Anybody from the United States here? Where? Do we have any American students? Nobody? Okay. In the American schools, to graduate high school, you have to perform a certain amount of service in a nonprofit NGO in the community as part of your high school requirements. Because we want the students to realize the first mission of knowledge is not personal gain. It's shared experience. Break down the classrooms, lateral power. So, cyberspace, Skype your classroom assignments, collaborate around the world, break open the classroom. You can start here in this region. No one does it in France. And serve in the community. So you learn, if you're going to learn language, or if you're going to learn math, or you're going to learn the environmental science, learn it in the community. Then we need interdisciplinary studies. You're doing this here in your universities. Very unusual in France because it's pretty centralized. You're one of the first schools I've heard of where you're crossing the disciplines so that you get multiple perspectives. And not each discipline shouldn't be taught as an autonomous module. Each discipline should be interacting with each other discipline in systemic thinking, and you're doing that here. That makes you unusual in France, unusual in Europe. Then we need multicultural studies, so we have shared perspectives, because there are different approaches in different parts of the world. The idea is to understand education as a shared collaborative experience, shared meanings. So it goes along with the internet. On the internet, you love to game, you love to work together, you enjoy the collaborative experience. And apparently, no young person ever heard about the tragedy of the commons. See, my generation believed that human nature is such that if you open source everything and share it, someone will take advantage of the other person. And they'll take it all. It's called the tragedy of the commons. If you ever share everything, some jerk is going to take it all. Apparently, no one in your generation ever read this essay called The Tragedy of the Commons, because there are millions of you freely giving your time, Wikipedia and Linux and YouTube and games all over the place, and you're sharing. And you're collaborating because by adding value to the network, it adds value to you. And you're trusting each other, and the amount of outliers, tiny, that cheat. And then you just expel them. This is such a generational shift. This is the collaborative era. All right. It's exciting.
I have
All right,
just a
where-
really
where-
short
where are you?
question.
Where are you?
Okay, you had me at 30%, so let's say worst case scenario in 50 years, nobody changes anything. And so where should we go to be among the happy few that are the 30% who survive?
There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. Where are you going to go? The whole world is faced with climate change. There is no place. Oh, we'll go to Canada. You're not going to be able to escape anywhere. When the water cycle changes, the feedback loops multiply positively. So every time there's a feedback loop, I'll give you an example, feedback loops. The Arctic, covered by snow. All right? So when the snow melts, what happens? When the snow is there, it reflects the sun back off. When the snow melts, there's no reflection and you get more heat staying down on the planet. It's a feedback loop. Magnify that toward every kind of feedback loop that's emerging and you see how terrifying this is. So for the climate skeptics, for example, I love it when they say, this is cyclical, this is seasonal, these are spots from the sun. Give me a break. The Arctic has been encased in ice for millions and millions of years. Now the Arctic is ice-free in August for the last 5 years, and it's moving quick toward depletion. This isn't seasonal because of some sunspots. So there's no place to escape. There really isn't any. I don't know how to urge you enough to move this passionately with your generation very quickly, because otherwise I shudder at what life's going to be like for you in 2050. In terms of how fast you can make this shift, the first industrial revolution, the juvenile infrastructure was in place in the 19th century in parts of Europe and the US in 30 years. That was a massive infrastructure. Rail, putting in coal storage, setting up print, setting up public schools. 30 to 40 years, there was a juvenile infrastructure in place. Another 20 years, a mature infrastructure. It took less than a half a century. Second industrial revolution, between 1900 and 1929, we put in centralized electricity, the automobile, the highways, the suburbs, the telephone. Then after the war, we had a break between the Depression and the war, we put in the interstates and finished it. Why would the third industrial revolution take any longer time? You should be able to have a juvenile infrastructure in place within 20 years, and the moment you start, you're getting the jobs and businesses. You don't wait. And we should have it in place, a mature infrastructure, by 2040. But we have to do it. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, because I have
Some more?
to be, yeah. The last one, yeah, short question.
Oui, donc j'avais prévu une question longue, mais je vais raccourcir. Je pense qu'une des dimensions qui est derrière cette nouvelle société, c'est un changement en profondeur des attitudes sociales et un changement en profondeur des pactes sociaux qui lient les individus sur la planète. Avec des valeurs donc de solidarité, de localisation aussi, je pense, c'est des idées qui sont passées, de solidarité, de coopération. Moi personnellement, je suis d'accord avec ça à 150%, complètement d'accord avec ça comme perspective. Mais d'un autre côté, je vois aussi que les systèmes qui nous ont menés à la catastrophe où on est arrivé aujourd'hui, à la crise multidimensionnelle dans laquelle on est, je vois que ces systèmes ont tendance à perdurer, ont tendance à se défendre et ont tendance même à en rajouter en quelque sorte, à accélérer en quelque sorte dans un certain nombre de cas la course vers l'impasse vers laquelle il me semble qu'ils vont. Alors voilà, derrière ça j'ai deux questions. Est-ce que vous pensez que le temps va suffire? Est-ce que le changement de génération comme ça va suffire avec les technologies de type Internet et puis les technologies de mise en relation? Est-ce que ça va suffire comme ça? Si ça va suffire comme ça, est-ce qu'on va y arriver à temps? Parce qu'on parlait tout à l'heure d'écologie des populations. L'écologie des populations, c'est qu'il y a des éléments de ces populations qui meurent et d'autres qui naissent. Voilà, donc il faut aussi savoir faire mourir, il faut que la population, il y a des espèces qui s'éteignent aussi, donc il faut que la population sache faire mourir les éléments qui devraient donc nous cuisiner. Voilà, donc la question c'est, est-ce que vous pensez que ça va aller assez vite tout seul? Et si ce n'est pas le cas, est-ce que vous pensez que cette transformation-là va se faire dans l'harmonie intergénérationnelle, ou est-ce qu'il y a une question politique dure à l'intérieur de cette question?
I know that we can put this in place right away, within the next 30 years. The technology is here. We know it can move more quickly in the emerging countries. That's why the United Nations has adopted these 5-pillar infrastructure, because they're virgin. They have no infrastructure to protect and defend and maintain. When cell phones came in, we were surprised at millions of people getting cell phones in sub-Saharan Africa and rural India. They didn't even have electricity. They got them. Then the cell towers came. So we know we can move this quickly in rural areas, create microgrids, and connect up very quickly. And all over Africa now, there are startup companies in the rural areas in the last 24 months. They're doing this. They're going to move quickly. So I think we can move the developing world at least as quickly as the industrial world, maybe more quickly. But you're asking in time. I don't know. None of us know if we're in time. We do not know if we've gone over the edge, and the irreversibility of climate change is now going to give us the catastrophic effects. We just don't know. You're going to have to live with that existential worry, and with real-time climate change at the door now. There's just no way around it. And we have to hope that within the next 30 years, as we do this, if we're on page, we will be able to mitigate it before we've gone over the edge. I think it's I wouldn't bet one way or the other. I'm just being honest with you. But we have to assume we can. We don't just sit and wait. In terms of the population of the planet, what we need to do is the top 40% of us that are living with a big ecological footprint, here we are, we've got to reduce our energy needs, which this does, because we increase productivity by using less energy. So the bottom 40% of the human race can come up and meet us somewhere at the comfort level of life. It's a big challenge. We also know that in terms of decreasing population, it's not just about how many people there are. It's how much of the planet's resources each person's using. So wealthy people, we use much more on our ecological footprint than poor people, but we still have too many people. We know that electricity frees women. You show me a patriarchal society where the women are the slaves and there are lots of children, no electricity. Electricity frees women because women are the beasts of burden. They are the ones that get the firewood, the kindle, the energy, the water, and you have large families to protect your long life. Patriarchal, male-oriented societies. You see it everywhere. Electricity has played a big part in freeing women so they can get education. And with electricity, you don't need upper body strength. You can have the new jobs that require thinking, not just physical strength. So we believe as this comes into the developing countries where they have no electricity, this is a real threat to patriarchy. It's a good threat. Because then women will be able to take their place. And wherever we go in the developing world, the women understand this completely. They understand this. So I'm having some hope. There are so many fronts where I have guarded hope. But I've been involved in this since 1973. I'm not naive. I'm not overly worried about the energy companies because we have a better model. And we have real estate, construction, IT, transport, logistics, a much bigger elephant. What's going to require is the regions step forward. And in each region, the chambers of commerce, the small and medium-sized businesses, the producer co-ops work with the universities, the business community, the civil society, create the node. There's nothing like success. In this region, you show this can work. And believe me, it'll go like fire to all the rest of the regions. Make it work here. Thank you.